Welcome to How to Be a Person, a podcast about life, with me, your host, Giuliano Grimaudo. Jeff, how's it going?
Good, man. Yourself? How's everything going?
It's great, man. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you
Yeah,
coming
man.
on.
Thank you. I think your podcast notes was like, I think if you notice, we had exchanged maybe two sentences. Let's
Yeah,
talk. Okay, let's talk.
exactly. It's so funny. I say this usually at the beginning of every podcast just because it comes up that we haven't met before.
Yeah,
This is how I intended to do it. I was inspired to start this podcast because of driving for Uber for like over a decade. I would have people
yeah,
get in my car, never met them before, don't know anything about them, and we would have these like amazing conversations. And
that's too
so
cool.
that was kind of my point in doing this, was like to kind of recreate that. So I don't even, sometimes people will be like, here, like, yeah, like read up on me here or do this. I'm like, I don't want to know anything.
Yeah.
Like just come on and we'll get to know each other as people, and we'll go from there. So
Those are the
um
best, man. Those are the best guests, and I'm like you, so I never drove Uber, but I'm also the guy when I get in, I want to have the conversation, right? So I'm the guy that's in the seats, like, hey, are you busy? What's been going on? Anything crazy?
yeah, yeah, I
So
love
yeah,
that.
I enjoy the conversation too.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's funny how over the years you kind of have to learn to just kind of read the room. Like some people want to talk and some people don't want really don't want to talk.
Um, don't y'all have the feature? I notice on mine where I can set it, like what music do you like your music on? Do you like your
Yes.
conversation, whatever? And I think it's in your
Yes.
profile.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, so I think it depends on if you're I think if you're getting like a comfort trip instead of just a normal one, you can put all that stuff. But I will tell you as a
yeah,
driver, I don't see any of those things unless it's a comfort trip. So if you're just doing
this
like
is
a normal
comfort.
Uber X, it doesn't tell me any of your preferences.
Yeah.
So funny.
Yeah,
Anyway.
no, I'm with you there. That is but we also lose that ability to strike up a conversation sometimes. There's a
Hmm.
disconnect with that. I see some, where folks were more introverted, or they usually I'm shy. So just the ability to strike up a conversation with a stranger, I
Yeah.
think is becoming a lost art in some ways too.
Oh man, I totally agree with you. This is why I say like some people are very open to conversation and some people it's like the exact opposite. And I will say there are times when I'm in my car and I can tell like the person is like they don't want to talk.
Yeah,
And I don't judge them in any way because there's definitely times where I've been a passenger and I didn't want to talk either.
yeah,
But when I see the pattern, like you said, of a lot of people like not wanting to talk, it actually makes me a little bit sad because I've found that like that's part of what makes life like enjoyable, is like connecting with another human being and just like having a I mean, obviously I wouldn't be having a podcast if I didn't value human conversation, but that's like I really feel like that's part of what makes life like worth living, is like connecting with other people. um I think it's almost become it's become like trendy to be like I hate people, right? And to be
yeah.
like, I don't want to talk. Like, oh my gosh, I hate having
Well,
to deal
you
with
can
people.
text like me and you we could have had this long text exchange and never have, right, and that's kind of where we are. Teaching sales, sometimes we run into that where
Mm,
I'm like, man, text, because that's how most people want to be. They want to be warmed up by text. Let me see if I can understand this, and it's very non-invasive. I can get back when I need to, and
mm,
then it allows the person to continue the conversation, right? So
hmm.
I think it's okay to have that, and I think it's very positive.
Yeah.
But I'm like you, man. I see so many people that they never talk. They everything is by time. Like you guys ever pick the phone? I'm like, nope, don't need to. Um, so yeah, I've seen that become more and more, and it's um, ebbs and flows of technology, right?
Hmm.
I don't want to steal your show here, but like
No, no,
it's
please.
on the I have kids. And my every now and then something knuckleheaded will go on at school, right? You have
Yeah.
children?
What was
Yeah,
that?
you have kids? Do you have
Oh
kids?
no, my wife is pregnant right now with our first kid, but we don't have any
Yeah,
yet.
awesome. Hey, well, look, if you ever have a plant, a dog, or a kid, you never run out of people trying to give you advice. So you just get ready. Everybody, you'll have a line of people that's going to tell you everything you need to do, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But um, I'm my kids are 12 and 15. Technology, like we're on it right now. You're on
Hmm.
one side of the country, I'm on the
Hmm.
other. Um, but we got them both phones, and I used the excuse because we couldn't find them. Like,
Yeah.
just want to be able to find my kids. So one of the easiest ways to do that is give them a phone, and then we use
Yeah.
screen time to lock it down. But
Mm.
when they get it, somebody will get in text groups or whatever, and some kid will, you have to police that stuff. And
Mm.
so there was something that happened. So we get to have this conversation, and I tell them, I'm like, what you guys have accept. I'm like, I used to have to mail letters. I'm not trying to like tell you this is the way I used to have to do it. That's
Back in
not my
my day.
intentions. Yeah, but I'm just telling them. I'm like, listen, when you want to say something dumb, I used to have to sit down and write that out or pick
Hmm.
up the phone. Look, I used to call people mad. Rotary dial, like, look, and you were so mad, you pushed the foot.
Picturing it like,
And you're like, I'm freaking soon as I get done dialing all freaking 12 of these stupid numbers, I'm
yeah,
chewing somebody out. Look, by the time you got to the last digit, you were done.
yeah.
You
Like
were
I'm not even mad
so,
anymore. Forget it.
yeah, I'm not mad. I don't know. And you misdialed it, right?
Mm.
The number you call. Now
So
it's
true.
boom. It's boom. I've hit Giuliano and said, hey, you're a jerk.
Yeah.
And that, right? I've been mad. I'm like, you're an ass, right? Or
Yeah.
from yeah, so I just think so. I'm teaching my kids that the other day, and I'm like, listen, you guys, when y'all do something, it's instant. And
Mm.
and I always do the. How many of y'all have had a dad in this room, right? Or I'm like, this is my first time being a dad too,
Yeah.
right? So there's no manual, and we're all figuring it out together. That's that the accessibility to technology, but I also see kids now that are like, I want to go outside and play. Like my son, he's like, I
Mm.
just want to go outside and play. I'm not
Yeah.
worried about any rest. Now he likes his time on his games, but
Sure.
so just technology, Giuliano has changed how you and I, and then how our kids and how we all
Yeah.
interact.
It's so
Um,
true.
so yeah, it's harder to have a conversation, man, because you can, most people text and emails part of it, but not as much.
Yeah.
But then they snap. Or my kids, we don't do social media with our kids, but
Mm.
there's another way, right? Is
Yeah.
a quick video, or you don't have to say, "Hey, I'm at the mall." You just snap a picture of the mall. They're like, "Oh, Jeff's at the mall."
Yeah, yeah. No, I do feel like for me, like my biggest perspective when it comes to technology is just that like it's so insanely useful, right? Like in this scenario, I love that we get to have like a real human being conversation
Yeah,
as if we're in the same room, even though neither of us had to get on a flight,
yeah,
nothing. You just open up the laptop and like now we're talking, right?
yeah.
And that's amazing. And I feel like that is the true, like, for me, the true benefit of technology is to be able to connect human beings. But the problem is, like you said, there are parts of technology and the way we connect that is not like a human being, right? Like
Right.
with a text message, which is funny because I'll say like I hardly ever talk on the phone. If I'm talking to somebody, it's either over text message or I'm FaceTiming them, right? So
Yeah.
it's like I'm like having a real like conversation with a person, or it's just like a quick thing over text message. And I guess all I'm saying is that like there are things like, for example, text messages, it's weird. It's not like normally talking to a person, right? Like you can some people will like say things over text or like in comment sections that they would absolutely
Yeah.
never say to someone in
Yeah.
person if they had to look them in the eye. And the fact of
Oh
the
yeah.
matter is we're all human beings. Like if you could not look somebody in the eye and say what you're going to say, you absolutely should not be saying it over text message or on
No.
social media. You know what I mean?
We quit punching each other in the mouth, right?
Hmm.
We regulate each other less, so there's a little more keyboard courage that come out of that, out of those ages too. But
Yeah.
you're spot on that. Is that there's no there's no gap between emotion and response, and we used to
Hmm.
have a gap between emotion and response.
Hmm.
That as much as we hated that because I just want to get I really want to read this person's, but it allowed some cool off time.
Yeah.
It
It,
allowed, see, everybody used to be like never respond to an email mad or never do this mad because that's
mm.
why like you got
Yes.
I
See,
mean
it's
right
so funny too because if you think about it, someone could be like, "Well, yeah, but like in person, there's no gap. Like you're there in front of them." And it's like, yeah, the
yeah
being in their presence creates the gap. Like I can't think of how
Yeah,
many times I'll be talking to my wife about something at home, and I'm like, "Oh man, this person, they said this, that pissed me off. If they say something again to my face, like I'm gonna say something back, you know." And then we're in
yeah.
the scenario, and it's like, you know what?
I ain't
I
saying
just I
that.
don't know. I don't want to
You
get
let
into
it
an
slide.
argument, right? And like
Yeah,
you don't say anything, and that's the thing is that like I do really feel like the genuine eye contact, being in the same room as a person, like that is the true you, not you who like has time to sit and like what am I going to say and like tell them off, or who sends off something really quick because they were thinking about it but didn't think about what the impact would have been if they would be looking this person in the eye when they said it. Like I feel like those are parts of us that it's so I'm saying all this because I am a person who like dives into comment sections. Okay. When I
yeah,
come across a post and it seems like controversial or whatever, I immediately open up the comment sections and I start looking. And it's hard sometimes because one of the things I've taken from my time driving Uber, right? And I've had a lot of different jobs that were customer facing, but I'll say specifically Uber, right? Because I've been doing that for over a decade.
yeah.
People getting in and out of my car, like one of my biggest takeaways from that is like people are good. Like most people just want to be happy. They just want to get where they're going. They just want to live their life in peace, right? Like that is like the
Yeah.
majority of people. Okay. And I'm saying this from over 10 years, people getting in my car every single day, all day long. Okay. But when you go in the comment sections online and you see some of the things that people say, it can really like discourage you and make you feel like, man, like, and this is why stuff is popular. People suck. Like that's all. That's kind of
That's
what it feels like when you're reading this
super
stuff. But
sad.
I know from my in-person interactions with thousands and thousands and thousands of people that that's not the case, right? And so that's why I say like when I look at like the interactions people have online, like through comments and or even like group chats and text messages and stuff, it's like that is not representative of human beings as a whole. And
Yeah.
I feel like anybody who looks at humans and go, "Oh, people suck," is like, I think you need to talk to more people. I think you need
Yeah,
to connect with more people in person as a human being.
my mom always said, "Don't let your mouth overload your butt." Right? She
Wait,
said it.
what? I don't understand that.
He said it a different way. Don't let your mouth overload your butt. Except she'd use the cuss word. And I don't
Yeah.
want you to. I don't want to. I don't want to be that guy on your
Oh, don't worry about
podcast.
it.
But
Don't worry about it.
she would be like, "Don't let your mouth overload you." Right?
Yeah.
And that's just that's the words I grew up to. And
Yeah.
then my mouth overloaded my butt a couple times in school, and a couple. I got regulated, and I was like,
Mm,
I learned not to things. But I wonder. We process emotion differently too.
mm,
I did public safety work, right? We worked a lot
yeah.
in life or death, um, and I'll speak to that a lot of times. Is it's different, and so that post, and it solicited an emotion to create that comment, and we
Mm,
didn't allow that same cooling off time, or maybe, but right, it's just somebody felt obligated to just unload in that comment section. So sometimes
mm,
when our social media, we're learning how to use that too. And I have friends who are like, I've never wanted to be there. And I've had friends that's like, I tried it, but, and I think sometimes when like, all right, you go back and read the post and you might read the post and go, man, it ain't that bad. Right.
yeah.
But it's just how everyone else processes emotion, because
Yeah.
especially when you see negativity, is that post itself or the situation or how they inserted themselves into it has created this negative moment inside the comments, or maybe
Mm,
positive, right? If you go back and you
sure.
find a good
Sure.
one's a funny joke and you're like, holy crap, everybody really liked this. Um,
Yeah.
but like on the negative ones, there's something, either it's a lot of times it can be political, it can
Yeah.
be school related inside their
Sure.
community, all sorts of little things like that. Yeah, I don't, but I see that, but I don't, I probably don't do that as much as you do on looking at the comments or the thing. I could
Yeah.
see somebody getting emotionally wrapped up in a text or a
Yeah.
post.
Well, I will say like part of my reason for diving into comment sections is because well, it's part of the reason why I started this podcast and why I enjoy talking to people is I like hearing different points of
Yeah,
perspective.
same.
And there's a lot of there's a lot of really really good comments in comment sections. And so whenever there's something like I see a post, like I said, that might be controversial or something I didn't think about before or whatever, I just go to the comments because I'm like, I wonder what other people have to say about this. Because sometimes people will say things I'm like, wow, I never looked at it from that angle before. And even sometimes when people are arguing back and forth, they make some really, really good points, you know? So to me,
Yeah,
like, that's part of why I enjoy it. But I will say, like, part of my motivation in making this podcast as well is to kind of showcase like a lot of different people so that people listening can understand that like we don't have to agree on everything, like we don't have to be the same person as the person next to us, but like everybody is a human being who ultimately is, I believe, well, and I'm actually curious to hear your side of this because I know a little bit about your your background, that we'll talk about in a second. But I believe that people are good,
yeah,
and that has been my overall experience. And I want people to believe that. Like I want people to like to hear conversations and be like, wow, okay, that guy maybe thinks about things a little bit differently than I do, or from a different angle, or has a different perspective. But I can see how like he's a good person. You know, like that's really what I want is I want to encourage people to have these conversations too, because I'm not like, we didn't create this. I didn't go, okay, perfect. You think the same as me, so come on my podcast so we can, you know, reminisce about how we think the same, right? What I do is like it's just, you're just a random person, and I want other people to understand that that's possible. Like literally, you could just go outside right now, find a random person, talk to them, find things in common and connect with them and have a better life because of it, and like feel better after having that conversation. So
yeah.
yeah.
I think what you touched on there is you want to be informed, not persuaded.
Mm.
Right? I love all that, man. If we're all the same, well, one of us is useless, right? Is it's I really enjoy the different opinion. I don't expect me to pick up, and bear with you. That's not
Yes.
right. But I do, man. I enjoy hearing other people's sides of things. Even on my podcast, we do a lot on
Hmm.
second chances and stuff. So it generally has a story of negative impact where we,
Yeah.
have this superhero that comes out of the out of the mud type thing.
Can you tell me a little bit
But
about that? Because I don't, again, I don't know anything about
yeah, yeah.
what.
So mine's a second chance podcast.
Okay.
So
Okay.
mine was just kind of born out of when I was heavily. I started in public safety when I was 15 years old, and I kind of worked in that industry till I was about 35. And
Okay.
my career ended with me getting arrested as a DUI. So okay, it's hard for cops to recover from a
Mm,
DUI arrest, right?
okay.
So I went from 15 years old to that long of a lifespan inside of all I, if it didn't have red lights or sirens or cops and robbers, I didn't know anything about it. So I had to rediscover. So I had to rediscover me. Spent too much time kicking the can, and just probably 3 or 4 years of just being mad because I couldn't do what I used to
Mm,
do.
yeah.
But and then so the kind of the story goes of me just discovering like all the business stuff I was learning and really embracing the business path, and then 10 years I went on to start my own businesses and things like that. So I really enjoyed conversations and help people collapse time that were kind of where I was. So whether you're public
Mm,
safety or what have you, you drove Uber for 10 years.
yeah.
That's a long freaking time. And if somebody walked in tomorrow and said, hey, you can't drive Uber anymore, I don't care what you say. There's going to be, you're like, wait a minute, man, I get
Yeah.
to go, man, that's what I do. So
Yeah. Yeah.
as simple as that sounds, but then, but listen, man, I think the cool part about my journey, it started when I was a young kid with a little bit of family gun violence growing up. My
Okay.
grandfather drank more and played with guns, and so there was always chaos going on inside of my house. And then I walked through. Me and him had an incident one time where he threw hot coffee on me, and my family, it was, hey, I was trying to just, I remember standing in front of that sink just trying to cool off. And after I was, my aunts were there and they were like, well, if you say anything about it, they're going to take you away from us because I couldn't report it, right? Because he would get in trouble.
Mm,
So, and then as time goes on, like I found my grandmother dead, she had committed suicide with a firearm. So I was
whoa.
always around some type of gun violence and just in a little chaos as a kid.
Yeah.
And then I stepped right into the EMS and public safety world, right? So
What
I
were the
fit right.
ages of what age were you at when those couple of things happened you just mentioned?
So the hot coffee thing, you're probably talking 5 or 6 years old.
Okay. And then with your
Um,
grandmother?
finding my grandmother, I was 12, 13 years old.
Wow. Wow.
Um, my grandfather, like, he set my mom's car on fire. I mean, it was, and we lived in a rural environment, right? So and this is what I've told some people who we get in the in depth about it.
Mhm.
Was we lived in a rural environment, and you're talking late 70s, early 80s, when
Mm.
security was non-existent. Law enforcement in those out in those outlying areas wasn't. It was rare that you would see a police officer unless there was
Sure.
something going on. So my
Sure.
grandfather, I always say, like back then, shots going off in the middle of the night was somebody didn't. There wasn't a lot of thought process about gunfire like we process it now, right? Back then, you were either warding off an animal or shooting
I see. Yeah.
an animal, or someone had spooked you, so you were shooting then, right?
Yeah.
Very seldom was you're under attack from your from your
Yeah.
family, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I moved into public safety, dude, and that was like it's just action all the time, and so all that
Yeah.
chaos that I had kind of been around. um, I that's what I fell right into, and so I got to live that life of adventure. And then when it ended, had to refigure out. So that's kind of what the Second Chance podcast is.
Okay.
Folks come on that have lost their way. I've had drug dealers, I've had I mean all
Yeah.
sorts of cool guests. A lot of spirituality, religion folks that have
Sure.
walked through a very negative walk, and then found spirituality in some way. Those are a mainstay. But I'm like you. Some days it's like I don't know where the conversation's going to go, and it's because it's like we're trying to find the second chance, right? And we
Yeah.
ultimately end up just, hey, what's the day in your life look like? Type. It's
Yeah.
no different than
Yeah.
what you're doing.
Wow.
That's good, man.
So,
You've man, and I think when we do this is like you said, the technology lets me and you do this, and it just allows us to have a conversation. What I've learned about PTSD, obviously, I probably had some form of it growing up,
sure.
right?
Sure.
And a few of my guests, dude, they've educated me on what you were talking about in conversing.
Mm.
So a lot of folks go to therapy, and my struggle was always finding a therapist that could relate to me, because I've
Sure.
been through a lot. I got to do a lot as a police officer,
Mhm.
and doing undercover work and all these things. And so you're just constantly trying to find someone who can relate. And what I learned was Susan Snow is a great person with her story, but she was talking about when she finally had found someone who could help her was either write, draw, or talk about it. Or I think write and draw was her too. And I threw in talk
Mm.
about it because I'm not good at, I don't have a therapist, but I find if I can just talk to Giuliano,
Yeah.
shoot the breeze with him, man, talk about some of the
Yeah.
craziness of my life. I don't. It's just about me kind of getting it out,
Yeah.
and then I use the podcast and stuff to create content that kind of helps everyone else. That's kind of
Yeah.
it's kind of the vibe that I try to follow.
Yeah, yeah. So do you feel like if I understand correctly, are you saying that you feel like you just like being able to talk to people and talk
Yeah,
through things with them like that's essentially your form of
yeah.
therapy?
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
when you get folks on there that are talking about their stuff, sometimes it gets emotional, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
there's been some times I've had a handful of cult folks on there that were in
Okay.
cults and didn't, like my buddies were like, well, if I was in a cult, why didn't they get out? I'm like, I didn't know this was in a cult, dummy. Uh,
Yeah.
right? That's the whole purpose we're here.
Yeah.
So,
They weren't running the
um,
cult.
yeah, they
They
weren't
got
running the
tricked into
cult.
the
Yeah,
cult.
yeah, they
Yeah.
didn't apply to be in it and decided to turn in their notice. Um, they didn't know. But you realize, like, and I'm not trying to find that comparison, man, but there's a lot of folks that's been through hell out there, dude,
Yeah.
and resilience and bounce back from some imaginable things. And those folks end up on my show.
Yeah.
And there's the commonality of us just walking through that, and because I know how powerful the conversation is when I get to talk.
Yeah.
And then when I get to hear them, it gives me purpose. And a lot of times they're giving me advice, dude. Like they were talking, hey, I
Mhm.
did this or tried this and this worked, or
Mhm.
and we're trying to do it. Hopefully the whole end mission is somewhere along the lines, the guest is either going to relate to Jeff or they're going to relate to my guest, or a
Mm.
listener
A
is. And
listener,
then
yeah.
yeah, they can hopefully process their own way
Yeah. Yeah.
through their journey, and
Yeah.
and just kind of because it's you see more and more of just they went from PTSD to now they call it a moral injury, right? Seeing something that's not just naturally part of your human day. There's a doc
Sure.
up in Washington that I was in a meeting and or like an event. So it was Operation Yellow Tape. It's public safety folks. They all come together and kind of mental health awareness. The
Okay.
guy that runs that's solid guy. And one of his guy sponsors that was there that presented, he presented on moral injury. So that's where I learned more about it, right? So it's
Interesting.
not PTSD, right? It's not military killing, pay all the things, right? Or police officer work, but it's for some folks it may be just something that does not line up with their humanity.
Mm,
Um, or what they've been raised, and
yeah.
sometimes the moral injury could be, you were raised in an environment to where um, the father's takes care of the mom and dies, and a lot of marriages forever, and then they get a divorce and you're like, wait a minute,
Mm,
you've raised me to be like this all this
yes.
time. So it creates
Yes.
this injury of morality that is where you've been raised a
Interesting.
particular way. So
I'm gonna have to look into that because I've never heard that phrase
I'll
before, but I see it.
I did a blog post on it.
Okay.
I'll email it, or I'll message it over to you.
Okay.
And then the doc that told me, I credit him with telling me. So you'll see him.
Oh, okay. Very
Then
nice.
he's got some other content out on it, I think.
Okay, great,
Um,
great. Yeah, and if anyone, when you after you send it to me, I'll probably put it in the show notes too for
yeah,
anyone
yeah,
who's
cool.
listening who
Yeah,
wants to read more about it. So, okay, I have so many things. um, but first of all, what I'll say is I was thinking how earlier when I'm like, everyone, I really believe everyone's good. And I think, people are like, oh, well, so because you drove Uber and you saw people in this professional setting, like, congratulations, people are good. Just for a little bit of background on me, like, I have definitely seen some stuff.
yeah,
And I'm saying this. So, because, okay, I'll share part of my story. I don't share a lot of this all the time because I'm so far removed from it now.
yeah,
But, just because I want people to understand that like I'm not just coming from like a place of like, oh, I just lived this totally sheltered life and then
yeah,
and that's why I'm so positive. But so I got married. So my wife and I are married now, but this is my second wife. So I got
yeah,
married when I was 19. And see, part of the reason I don't share a lot of this is because I don't want to make it sound like I don't want to like bring down my ex-wife's
yeah. No,
reputation in any way.
it's a mutual. Yeah, this is
But there
I
were,
think you get to do your side, right?
yeah,
You get to
yeah,
talk about
yeah.
your feelings and your emotions, and she gets to talk about hers, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's how you process your stuff.
Yeah, well,
Hey,
now that you
listen,
say that,
Juliana.
I think, oh, she probably has some bad stuff to say about me too.
But here's the thing, I'm the same way because I have things for names. I don't listen names, but if a person was listening to it, they'd be like, "Yeah, he's talking about me."
Mm,
And I don't say that to piss you off or to make you mad. I'm just telling you how Jeff felt. And I've learned
hmm.
if there's a certain element, if we don't put our feelings and emotions first, you and I can talk about it and we can get right about it. But
Yeah,
I just, I'm such a forgiving dude. And
yeah.
I used to, I'm a people recovering, not full time, but I'm a recovering people pleaser too.
Okay.
Right. And I had
Yeah.
to learn to get right with, I had to learn to get right with being in charge. And if I'm
Hmm.
talking about me, I ain't trying to hurt your feelings. Just I'm talking about me.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Like, but I
Exactly.
understand. I didn't like trying to encourage you or whatever. But I'm just telling you, man. Like, I know exactly what you're feeling when you get ready to tell that story
Yeah.
because you're like, I don't want her texting me telling me she heard me talking trash. Right? That's not what I'm doing. I
Yeah,
just want to
exactly.
tell you how I was feeling in the freaking moment. So don't call
Exactly.
me and call
Yeah.
me out.
Well, and it is part of my experience. Like
Yeah.
whether, they want it that way or not, like I was there, right? So I experienced part of it. So anyway, my ex-wife, we got married. I was very young. She was like just a year or two older than me. And I'm not even going to share any of the stuff from her, but just suffice it to say, there were things that she was doing that she probably could have gotten. I guess she could have, I wouldn't necessarily say gone to jail, but like she could have been arrested for, right? And these were things that I had no idea
Yeah.
about before we got married. And then her brother, who was just a couple days younger than me, he committed suicide
Mm.
like before we had even been married a year. And then and I had to like be there for that. Like not when it happened, but like afterwards to help like identify the body and things like that. And then her dad a month after that died by suicide as well. Okay. So and we had to find him. So I'm only sharing this like I don't see like
I'm
if you
glad you
talk to
did,
me
man.
now like you
Yeah,
wouldn't know because this was back in 2012, right? This was a
yeah,
long time ago now and I'm so far removed from it, but I'm only sharing it because it's like just so you guys know, right? And like all of that stuff that happened, like I think you can probably agree to this, like that multiple suicides in such a short amount of time doesn't come from a place where there is not dysfunction. Okay.
yeah,
There was a lot of dysfunction. There was a lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol, there's a lot of all of that. Okay.
yeah,
And I mean, physical abuse, like lots of all of those things. Okay. And again, I'm not saying this because I'm trying to like spread someone's business. I'm saying all this to say, like, I have witnessed people do things that it would be very easy to be like, that person is evil.
yeah.
Like the things that they are evil. And even in those scenarios, like when I really had time to like examine that person, I was like, this person did a lot of bad stuff, but they
Juliana, it gets
ultimately are
like that.
good.
Well, here's the thing. I've always said it's what would their mom say, right? What
Yep.
would their mom? Because
Yep.
like let me tell you why.
Yep.
I've been fortunate enough to deal with some moms say he needs to go, right, or he's dangerous.
Yeah.
I've been fortunate enough in life to come across some moms that was so scared of where their sibling or kid was going to go
Mm,
that they wanted them to go to jail to find peace because they knew
mm,
that they were going to hurt someone.
yeah.
So I think what you'll find sometimes though, but um, if we ran into this person outside of this scenario, we would
Hmm.
probably get along. And I think you're right. I
Sure.
think it goes back to that emotion that was provoked out of that text, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But do I? There's one. I'll tell you real quick. I got to I got to stand in the courtroom as I had transport. So anyway, we had this guy, and we found a dead body one night, right? And then investigation. I'm shortening it up, but there was a couple days. There were some identifying factors that helped us move. We knew that this kid was from the city, so we was able to really start chasing down the city. And then um, just proximity to different people, we were starting to really isolate it. So we was able to identify the guy that had been killed, and then we were able to find the bar that he was at, and then that he had left with these guys, right? So
Hmm.
we end up like boom, things was just cooking. So anyway, end up making the arrest, and when we arrested, there was two of them, or it was actually three. I think one of them died before trial, and then one pled guilty, and because he was just there. The main guy beat the dead guy with a bat, and like he just beat him very very badly, right?
Yeah.
And when he got arrested, he was a little just psychopathic type stuff, and he was like, "Y'all, I'm gonna die." He tried to get law enforcement to shoot him. He tried, and then when he gets to jail, he's trying to escape, so people shoot him. So he had just like
Mm,
he had killed this guy and then rolled right in with a death wish.
wow.
So here's you talk about people being good. I'm
Yeah.
yet to find anybody with this guy because I think I think he ended up his mom or somebody he had no family come to court,
Okay.
maybe a sister or whatever, but just very unique situation. He
Yeah.
spent the least amount of time. I don't know if it was nationally or at least in the state of Virginia. He spent the least amount of time on death row. So here's what I was going to tell you.
Yeah.
So we had gone so far as when we would transport him, we had to have two. Um, like special operations or tactical type guys that would transport him because he was such a security risk, and he would always the earlier days he would try to fight with whoever's driving him and stuff. So a couple of us would. So my buddy, we take him. He got found guilty, and he was writing letters to the judge and saying, if you don't sentence me to death, I'm going to kill you, right? And he's going to kill everybody. He's going to kill the prosecutor. He's going to kill anybody that he can get his hands on. He's going to kill.
Mm.
Listen, so here's what Jeff got to do. So I transferred him to his sentencing, and then part of that I was on the security detail. So all right, so you know how the judge sits up high, right? So the judge is sitting way up, and he's at like a little. We had moved the tables and the lecterns out of the way, so he's just basically there's a table that stands between him and the judge.
Okay.
And so what happens when they call him to come up, he goes and stands on like a piece of tape. And we've told him like you got to stand on this tape. If you step off a tape, we had a shot going on like we're going to light you up, right? So
Wow.
step on that because because he wanted to be sentenced to death that day. So the security guys roll out. So there's nobody standing in behind him to block the door. So I step out and I'm standing right behind him, right?
Okay.
And I'm buffed up because the TV cameras are rolling, right? I want to make sure I'm all studly looking good. And I was there, dude. I was looking right above his head at the judge, and I was there when the judge sentenced him to death.
Okay.
And it felt so eerily like that because where I was standing at, it's like the judge was
Yeah.
talking to me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I remember when you talk about inherently good, people being good or whatever, he's one man. He got sentenced. Thanked the judge. Judge talked to him. They have this little thing where they're like try to get him to just admit remorse, so he'll save his issue him a life in prison versus a death penalty. And he
Mm.
was like he wasn't buying it, and so the judge said, "All right, you give me no choice but to sentence you to the death by execution in the state of
Mm-hmm.
Virginia." He has this little thing he reads, and I was standing there when he was talking. I was like, "Holy crap, he's talking to me right now."
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but then the guy like blew through his appeals, did basically refused to do anything else, and he was executed a short time after. Like most of those guys live for years on death row.
Yeah.
This guy was one of the fastest because he was just ready to go. So I always think about him like when you get there. So I tell you all this, just hold right. So I could tell you this: when you get into that part about there's good in a little bit of everybody, man, I'd just like to know a little bit more about him and his family or
Yeah.
whatever, because I don't remember, you know, I don't know I don't think we ever figured out, like, he just wanted to kill
Oh,
this
like
kid.
how he got to where he was.
Yeah, how did he end up
Yeah.
right there? So listen, his buddies were like, he just set out that night he was gonna kill this guy. Like
Yeah.
when we picked him up from the bar, we knew he was gonna try to kill him.
Yeah. You
And
know what's interesting is, well, first of all, I feel like, right, anything we came up with would just be that. It would be speculation. But I do think it's interesting, right? Because I feel like someone could look at what he did and be like, oh, like, see, look at he's bad. But what's so interesting to me is that it seems as if he felt that what he did was so terrible that there was no other option but for him to get the death sentence, which to me
I'll give you
shows,
that one, but
right? Doesn't that show like a
what
certain
led
level of,
up to what led up to I want this is what
oh,
I'm
yeah, yeah,
this
yeah.
is I'm ready to go,
Yeah.
right? This is
Yeah.
how I'm going out.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I
Yeah,
think all I'm saying is that, like, I do think it's interesting that, like, it was obvious that he knew that like what he was doing was bad enough that he was like, I need to be put to death, right?
yeah,
Which
yeah,
shows like a conscience. But
yeah.
all I will say is that, like, because I agree with you, like, see, this is what I'll say, because people are always like, well, yeah, but because I talk about this a lot, obviously. Like, I do believe people are good. And I think a lot of like the the rebuttals are like, well, yeah, but I mean, what are you, stupid? Like, people get murdered every day and this and that. And like, I don't disagree with that. Like, I'm not oblivious to those
Yes,
things. For me, the way I look at it is like, if you rewind far back enough to on any person, like at one point they were just an innocent baby, right?
yeah,
And so like ultimate, and there's like no one can look at a baby and be like, that baby's evil. Like,
yep,
they're just a baby. And so my point is that, like, I do believe that, like, underneath everything, that there is just a like foundation of good. That does not mean that, like, I would never, like, like, I would be scared to be around certain people. Like, I don't think like no one's gonna ever, like, could possibly ever hurt me. Like, I do believe that, or I know that, like, people do bad things, but I think at the core of humans, like, we all ultimately just want to be happy. We want to be safe. And I think I think
There's some
an
psychopaths,
extreme.
Giuliano. There's some deeper stuff that I've got to work around, get a
Yeah,
little bit of work in, and keep up with it. But there's some psychopaths that would challenge. They're exactly what you'd say.
sure.
When you met them, you'd be like, oh my God, it's one of the best people I've ever met in my life. But unbeknownst to you, they're stalking people and killing them,
Oh, jeez.
type stuff, right?
Yeah,
So there's that balance in there too,
yeah,
where where there's some different mindset people out there that
yeah,
have a lot of it spilled over negative childhood type stuff.
sure.
Sometimes like they're born like I've interviewed people like not so much was mean when he got here, right? Um, but like it's so some of that sometimes is they can turn on their personality. Some people
Mm,
like you ever see that guy and you're like, man, seems like he's always mad. Well, we know where that guy stands at.
mm,
Some of your other folks that are out there can turn it on and off.
yeah,
And where those multiple personalities. I want to tell you before I forget. I don't want us
sure,
to get too far ahead.
sure.
Going back to your girlfriend thing,
Oh yeah.
there's some good work in somatics, or your first wife. There's some good work that's coming out of somatics, and it's helping people rewire their brains.
Mm,
And it's I got a couple of my guests. If you brain body speak, oh crap, I'm drawing a blank on her name. She's gonna kill me. Holly Joy McBabe, and then there's another lady that's in Arizona, Tammy Cox.
okay.
She does some hypnotist work, but both of
Mm,
them kind of work in somatics, and it's just there's some exercises, there's some acknowledgments, and some different stuff. They got some programs that help on the childhood side of because like let's think about it. You guys got married. You're 19. She's only a few years old. She hasn't had time to process out some of that negative
mm-hmm.
childhood, if there was, right?
Yeah.
That's the work that somatics has been able to help. And I've
Mm.
had some folks that's been success stories of that. So she's listening before she gets mad and text you. Tell her to look up, tell her to hopefully you'll look up. And I'm saying this to your guest that might hear
Yeah,
that to be like,
sure.
man, you know what? Dang, I was right there too. I got
Yeah,
married too young,
absolutely.
or this or that, whatever. But if you're in that situation where because this was me, I was reckless behavior from a very young age all the way up until I got in trouble, right? I was just fortunate that nobody got hurt but me. All the things, all the stuff was internal, but a lot of it comes, I think, just from when you join when you get into EMS, like dead bodies is a part of the job, right?
Yeah.
So when you've already seen one, they're like, oh, well, you got a prerequisite to be here. So I think when you go back to that is where we've advanced in some of those other technologies, and being a young person. If I could, it's like, hey, what would I go back and say? If I could introduce that 18, 19, 20 year old Jeff to this kind of work that
Mm,
Holly and Tammy and those guys, there's multiple people out there doing it. I'm just telling you
yeah.
folks, two names that come to mind with me. I think it would be a good healing tool for anybody that's listening and maybe your ex-wife as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One thing I was thinking about too was how earlier you were saying that like signs just like talking to people and talking like in like just like, instead of going to like an actual like I'm going to therapy like very structured versus like hey yeah I just like talk to people and like when I have an opportunity to kind of talk about my experience I do like that was me like that was kind of how I got past all of that. But what I will say is that I did go to therapy. But what's
Yeah,
so funny, I didn't even realize this, but because I had reached out to my therapist like years later just to kind of like update him and be like, hey, by the way, my life's like amazing now. I just want you to know.
that's
Right. And
awesome.
like, thank you, and he was like, by the way, I just looked up and you literally had like 6 sessions or 7 sessions or something like that. He's like, it was not like a ton of stuff. He's like, so thanks. But like, I mean, there's you, mostly you. Right. And I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that. But my point is that like, part of what got me to where I am now, which I will say is like, I'm happy, I'm fulfilled, I have a great relationship. Like that's when I say like where I am now, that's what I mean. Um, it was kind of a combination of things, right? Like I did go to therapy, but it wasn't like for years, right? It literally, like I said, it was probably a handful of sessions. And then I also was like reading books, and also I was like talking to people, and like hearing other people's stories and sharing mine and going back and forth. And I think it's important for people to hear that there are different paths to getting to a life where you feel like happy and fulfilled and have healthy relationships. Like it's not just one singular path. And I think
Yeah.
you need to find and do what works for you. Like it's not just go to therapy, because even the idea of going to therapy, I didn't realize this until I looked into it myself, was that therapy is not just one thing. It's like a dozen different things, right? And like you could be going to a different type of therapist. For me, what I did, the type of therapist that I went to specialized in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which personally I would recommend. But
Yep.
my point is that there are tons of different types of therapy, even just within the idea of going to therapy. And so I feel like anybody who feels like maybe they're trapped in whatever their experience they had, like whatever negative experience they had, and they feel like they're being held back, that like they should explore different options, and they should and don't feel like it has to be like this one path
Yep.
forward, and find what works for
Agree.
them.
I think you gotta, yeah, you explore, figure it out. And the other thing is don't overlook what life's sending you and learn in those moments. I mentioned I got arrested. The trooper that arrested me, he ended up getting reassigned to another county. And then this was in 2008, 2014, 2012, 13, somewhere in there. He had came by where I worked, but we never connected because I was in a good spot, right? I didn't want to deal with any of that at all. And I had kind of moved on and I'd found my rhythm in business.
Hmm.
And then I found out later, 2014-ish or something like that, 15, he had died and
Hmm.
just went out hunting, sat down by a tree and passed away, right?
Oh wow.
So I had left, started my own, I got my own gym, Fit Body Boot Camp, and bought it on we had been shut down for COVID, and I reopened my own gym. We had split them up. So I
Okay.
opened it, and one of my first members, this female, comes in, man, and she's still there today. And so where I'm operating my gym, I'm in my groove, right? And this we have these thing called the Fit Body Games. We go out and compete against other gyms and do obstacles, kind of like CrossFit Games, right? If you understand the concepts, right?
Sure.
So we do this whole competition. My group wins, and this girl is on there. So her husband comes up. We were on a football field here locally, and he's like, "Hey, I need to talk to you about something." I'm like, "What's up?" And he goes, "Man, I really wanted to say how much I appreciate you and how grateful I am that my wife found your gym. You're absolutely a key component of why that our marriage is still together." And I'm like, "Really? Thank you." And, probably a little bit of humility there, like, "Ah, man, you probably did all the work." And he's like, "No, you know," he goes, "You don't understand." He says we had a baby, and that baby died. And he goes, my wife had been depressed, and
Mm.
they had just been struggling as a couple after that time. And he's like, when she saw the ad for your gym, he goes, and she started coming and started working out and all those things, and she did 100%. She never missed a class, 6 days a week. And he goes, I noticed a change in her and all these things, right? So here we go. I'll tell you this. So we ended up sitting beside each other, at dinner, we're having some drinks, celebratory. We just won, and he leans in and goes, "Hey, I heard you used to be a police officer," and I was like, "Yeah, yeah." And he goes, "My dad was a trooper." I'm like, "Really?" I said, "What was your dad's name?" It was the trooper that had arrested me.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I pay when I speak to this as part of the things I kind of outline in my speaking.
Yeah.
Um, I walked through the downsides of life, all the crap I dealt with as a kid.
Yeah.
I can go through all the stuff, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, on leadership, about law enforcement, doing undercover work, and all that stuff. But when I get to, and I'll layer this part of it in, right, of just my life
Sure.
and my journey, and then that's why I was telling you, like, don't don't be afraid to be very self aware of what lessons you're learning in life, and as people come and go. and how they come in when they leave, what they left you with to either learn or process, and you're, because man, I tell you, I could have all my depression, all my anger, all my stuff, every day, all the hell I put myself through for losing my job, making my bosses look bad, all the pressure I put on myself, it really, it meant the world when I figured out who he was
Yeah,
and how
wow.
I had impacted his life.
Yeah.
So listen, he and I connected. We were friends. We've been friends, but I didn't tell him. I sat on it for 2 years, and then I finally took him out last year and said, "Hey, I want to start talking about this. I want to start speaking on it, but
Mm,
I need to tell you the role you play in this story." And he got to tell me his dad's side
mm,
and about how I'd affected his dad and his dad's story and his dad, how he kept up with me all those years, and he really helped close some gaps between and help me kind of just process that my journey and the
yeah.
unknowns that I had. Right, so me and him were friends, and so that's kind of what I like to podcast on or like to converse about is, when you hit those down times, it's okay, right? It's going to happen or whatever. But man, if you can just start being self-aware of, these relationships that come and go and the impact that you're making. And when I started taking a hard look at that, man, that was a really cool moment. To know of where I was, and where I've been and all the hell unnecessary hell I put me through just so I could live that moment. Man, it was pretty cool.
Yeah. I'm curious
Um,
how you like what do you feel that was? Like, do you just feel like that was a big coincidence? Like what
my friend, Lynn Lewis, she'll tell you, I'll send you her thing. She says, Jeff, that's nothing but divine intervention. um, yeah, it felt very, it felt like, I've struggled with just finding my own spirituality. I do better with that in the last 2 years because of this, right?
Mhm.
And did a bunch of research on just universal consciousness and stuff like that. It's
Mhm.
hard for me to go sit on a pew because it's just not my jam, right?
Mhm.
Um, but man, you get to reading about that stuff and you start learning about, the plan you made before you came here. And
Mm.
you're just like you hear a lot of the rappers and some of the stars who talk about God's plan or what have you. It's one way to look at it. I mean, it's hard not to, it's, when you look at that, it's hard not to go down that because like you said, we can call it coincidence, but right, it's a lot of moving parts there to make that coincidence come together
Right.
exactly like it did, right? So
Yeah.
that's a hell of a coincidence, and um, it's powerful,
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
So we
For
call it
sure.
the stories. It's a butterfly effect is the
Yeah.
term that you'll hear people give something like that to where you kill a butterfly in this life, and then what's it you kill the caterpillar in this life, it can't go on to be a butterfly in the next life type thing. So
Mhm.
that's the theme of kind of the story outline that you'll hear people talk if you ever go to do something like that or you have it happen. It's like it's a
Mhm.
butterfly effect. Something bad happens and it turns out to be one of the best things.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely.
um,
So I have a question because
yeah,
your podcast that you said is called the Second Chances.
yep. Second chance for Jeff Robertson.
Second Chance. Okay. So is that kind of like, if I understand correctly, is it kind of like your second chance, like where you like you had this thing happen and then your life kind of you got a second chance, and then also like the people you have on, you feel like they're have an opportunity for a second chance. Is that am I right on
Yeah,
that track?
yeah. Through this journey, right, and ultimately getting to where I am, I'm like, for every time I thought it was the worst thing that ever happened to me,
Mm-hmm.
it ended up being the best second chance at life and a
Mm-hmm.
whole new career, coaching business, doing what I do now, and then speaking to this stuff and motivational, in a motivational type setting or what have you. That's what when I say it's my second chance, it is. And this is why I kind of named it like I did. I named it thinking about that kid when I was younger, right? Who in his world's dealt a pretty crappy hand, right? And then I did that um, with the guy that got arrested that knew nothing else. And he spent from 2007 until about 2000. My son was born in '09, and it really helped me, kick me in the butt, get me moving in that, hey man, there's a different purpose for you. Got to be a dad now. And I didn't want my kids to go through what I had gone through.
Mhm.
I never met my dad. I had one amazing man in my life since I was little. Um, but I never met my true dad, right? So I didn't want them to go through that. So that was a big helper. But when I created that name, was I spoke to that guy that was stuck in that 4 to 5 year window, that wasted 4 to 5 years of his life being mad, and
Mhm.
when his second chance was already there. So I kind of help use the podcast to help me and my guests. Sometimes we're helping people figure out and identify where their second, like, this is okay, move on,
Mhm.
put it behind, that kind of mentality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
rambled for a long time trying to explain to you that it's absolutely what you said it was, in a sense of just trying to help people move on faster and collapse time.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it's if we spend too much time, I think, I know I did. I spent way too much time worried about what I lost instead of really focusing on what I was gaining.
Yeah.
And I had done something for so long, and then you carry in all the childhood stuff, right? You carry, so I'm not processing. Um, I'm not processing. Everybody's like, we need a clear head. Well, hell, I never had that. And I didn't find that probably until the last 5 years, of where I started finding clarity, and a little bit of it was out of you know discovering who the trooper was and all that, right? So that really
Mhm.
helped find some clarity and purpose and vision. But then when I was naming it, that's where it kind of came out of, is helping that person recover from their setback way faster than I did to get on to their next thing. Um, because you only, as far as we know, man, we don't get. I don't remember my last life.
Mhm.
I probably lived multiples, right? But I don't remember it. So
Yeah.
I got to get all I can get out of this one. And the last
Yeah.
thing I want people to do is walking around being mad, kicking the can over something
Yeah.
that not forward thinking. Like, I
Yeah.
teach business owners, like, forward money. Let's focus on, don't you, why are you worried about old money? Let's focus on,
Yeah.
don't let old money mess up new money type
Yeah.
stuff. So
Yeah, so part of what's going through my head too, so I'll, because I, this is just me.
yeah,
Like, I have all this stuff going in my head. I'm just going to tell you what I'm thinking. So before, when we were talking about, I was saying about how I believe, people being good. Like, when I hear you talking about your podcast, I feel like there has to be somewhat of a belief there, right? That, like, that's, like, you believe in people's good and people's potential to be able to have them, like,
yeah,
in, like, yeah, here, let's talk about, like, moving past this and, like, getting to that good. But I also, it makes me think about, like, the experiences that you had and maybe the experiences that some other people have had, either while they're growing up or just whatever through their life experience, coming across people and having experiences where, like, maybe they dealt with somebody that, like, really really hurt them in uh, any number of ways, right? Like, physically,
yeah.
emotionally, whatever. And I could see them hearing me saying, oh, people are good, and they'd be like, you asshole. Like, you say that, but you never met this person, you know what I mean, and you don't know
Talk
what
to
they
some of
did
the
to me.
well, you talk to some of the ladies that's been on my podcast that experienced religious sexual abuse.
Hmm.
There's people in her life that said it was all good,
Mm.
right? Just she had to get out of that environment
Hmm.
to find the people who's like, no, this is
Hmm.
chaos.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I think sometimes you hit those nerves with folks like that, where there's always going to be someone, I think, that can relate positively even to the psychopath. Psychopaths probably relate to each other, right? Um, but I think, to your point, is here's what I would tell you to go down that. I like the fact that you're like my wife. When I get to talk to my wife, she grew up with mom and dad, and suburb, not rich, right? Her dad was blue collar. Put herself through college, right? So, but she's naive to all the hell that goes on, and she's naive. So I think that's your strong perspective, is you get to be the person that's like, well, hell, I didn't know this even existed. Please tell me, right? And this is way I've raced, because you remind me. Listen, you remind me of folks that in my community, where when I would come back from drug work, and I had long hair, I had all the stuff, right? And they would be like, been up in DC, New York, Jeff. I'm like, no, I work here locally. And they're like, doing what? And I'm like, focusing on our drug problem that's in our area. And they are like, no, you ain't. Stop messing around. They had no clue. Right. And that's okay. I think that's okay. But I think when you look at where you are, you're seeking knowledge and you want to just be informed. And I think when you lead with that is no different than me saying, well, you were just partially right. And your ability to be like, oh, and you, like you said, you're just having a conversation. You're not going to argue with them. Be like, you're wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I think you come from a really good spot of what will make you an amazing interviewer is because you're looking for someone like myself to come along and teach you something you didn't know anything about.
Sure. Well, I also
Um,
I'm interested to hear people's perspectives. So like I guess kind of what I'm getting at here is like you're with what you've seen. Like I know we kind of talked about this already, but I really want to get to like the heart of it. Like what do you believe about like the nature of people? Like do you believe that people like deep down I understand the exceptions, okay? I will admit like
yeah,
there are some people who are literally like maybe they have some wire crossed in their brain and like they're a psychopath and
yeah,
they're a murderer, okay? That I can understand, okay? But let's set those exceptions aside.
yeah.
I'm asking like what do you feel is like the do you feel like it's just neutral? Like we're just a blank
Uh,
slate or what?
no, I think even some of what would be considered a bad person if we changed their influences. You know, most people are a product of the five people you let in your
Mm,
life. Gang culture is a representative of that, right? It's
mm,
just that's why it does what they do. They
yeah.
seek out violence and all those things. But when I think if you can attack this at an earlier age, I'm a product of positive male mentoring.
Hmm.
All that shit I dealt with, the cops was at my house a lot, right?
Mm,
So when that happens, when you're a kid with the cops at your house, you're either going to be a criminal or you're going to be a cop. And just through my mom and her influence of like that being a criminal is not an option, dude.
yeah.
And my mom being her influence, but then just the right males coming into my life, and my buddy that introduced me to the rescue squad. And then when I got to the rescue squad, it's all guys there that were out saving lives. Now we drank, we partied, we did all the things that were negative. But I think when you said someone's bad, so we look at the person who may go to jail
Hmm.
for whatever reason, if we can get them in a solid environment with new influences, they come out functioning, right? It's just sometimes people are, and I grew up around this a lot too, was you were, your influence may be your neighbors or the people that are around you who are living the lifestyle that is causing you to be dysfunctional. But when you're able to come out of that, me and my wife talked about this with just how communities procreate, right? And
Hmm.
sometimes neighbors hooking up with neighbors is not always good because we're too close and we never move out of that area.
Mm, sure.
Me and my wife are from different cities, um, and we're closely related at all, right? So her influence, her coming in, and our just chance connection, it changed my influences. Otherwise I probably would have married a friend or somebody I
Sure.
knew, right, or
Sure.
something dated within my friends network, versus outside of that. So I think I'm not going to disagree with you at all. I think you'll find that most people, can, even if we say they're mean right now, if we can change their influences. I don't know that all the stuff that we do, but I think if you could move into an early age, if we could just get like dads back in the household, I can tell
Mm,
you that's a big deal.
okay.
um, but I think sometimes that helps with going back to what we talked about, is that helps. There's somebody there to help us become conversational and not texters.
Mm,
It helps us learn how to interact with people and
sure.
not be able to process those things. So I'm not, I absolutely think I believe in people, man, because
Yeah.
I work in people. I have seen some of the absolute best people. You talk to me and you're going to catch me saying there's a lot of bad people out there too, right? But you're right. The majority of the people you're going to come across are dang good people, want
Hmm.
to live their life. They don't want any, right? They just
Yeah.
want to be able to work, provide for their families, have fun when they
Yeah.
can.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. So this is what I'm asking then. These people, you said there's some bad people out there. Do you think that
yeah,
those people are inherently bad?
man. goes back to
Like, I
that
don't
dude
mess
I was
around with these
telling you about.
questions, man. Like, I'm just gonna get
Yeah,
to
but
it.
it
Like,
goes back to that dude, right? You can't. Most is a big word, probably. Most would probably be a big word for that. And it's comparable. Crimes against kids and humanity or
mm,
people. Crimes against people, you got to process a little differently than the guy who's stealing to put the stuff on Amazon,
sure,
right? Shaking down our big box
yeah.
stores and then repurpose, right?
Okay, so
Different
let's talk
crimes.
about the worst person you can think of. Maybe that guy who was put to death. Like, I'm asking you that and there's no right or wrong question. I want to
Yeah,
know what you think. Like, that person, do you think that person inherently is bad? I'm not saying in this moment, like what they did, whatever. I'm asking, like, to their core. Do you think that they're bad?
he was pretty damn bad, Giuliano.
I'm not saying to
Right?
disagree. Like, I really want to
Yeah,
know
I'm
what you
just saying,
think.
like he's one of the few people where I just don't. There wasn't enough people around to say, you know what, he was a good kid, went to school. There was not. All we knew about this guy was how bad he was.
So you just think that
Um,
deep down, like at the core of who he was as a person, was just bad.
yeah. And where did that start? Do it start before he was born? Was he born with that? See, that's like,
Yeah, it's a
where
good
was the
question. It's a
influence?
good
If I
question.
could,
Yeah.
because if we could say it happened post birth, we could say, all right, wait a minute, we can control that. We can help.
Yeah.
We need to fix that layer of negative influence. But
Yeah.
I don't know. See, that's
Yeah.
where he always
Yeah.
sticks with me a little bit.
Yeah. No, I can
Um,
understand why. I can understand that. See,
yeah,
this is my thing. This is why I ask and I'm like digging because for me, that's for me it's about the default setting, right? Like, when you get
yeah,
your phone and it's just got the
yeah,
default settings, that's what I wonder, right? It's like,
yeah,
is the default setting just good? Is it good, or is it just a blank slate and then what happens, you could end up positive, you can end up negative, or is it like I said, is the default good and then like bad things have to happen for it to be bad? I don't know, right?
yeah.
That's what I'm saying. But like, in
It's
my experience, it feels like the default is good. And I can
yeah,
see, though, I could obviously can very much see how some people get way off of that path and they do terrible things and, like, quite honestly, even unforgivable things, right? Um, but yeah, that's just, I mean, ultimately, like, none of us really knows, right? We're all just kind of exploring the nature of reality.
yeah.
But that's why I ask, because I'm
It's
curious other people's
and
perspectives.
it's the same. But I'll tell you this, man. The guy that's there's a couple guys out there that if you met them, same ones, man, they're evil, right? Because
Mm,
they do mean things to people, women, kids. They do mean things, and they take it, and more predatorial. I think you could
mm,
probably say there.
sure.
Those folks exist.
Yeah.
And like I said, is I always wonder is when you debrief this stuff and you kind of like one of my mentors in investigations. This is something he taught me as a young, even back before when I was not even police officer or law enforcement. Is when you investigate a murder, you owe it to that victim's family. And
Mm,
they're like, well, he's like, that whoever got killed, we owe it to them to solve their case and help their family find peace.
hmm
And he says, and when you do that, you find the person who did it. We also help the other side find peace, and you
mm,
help and just kind of. And I remember him telling me that, so out of that, I tell you that because of this,
yeah.
is I really got to go and interview and learn families. And when you died on my watches, I went and interviewed people that if you weren't from my area and I didn't know you, because most people I would know,
Yeah.
but if you were from outside the area that happened, I had a couple of those where a guy's wife had moved to Franklin and he showed up and ended up getting killed. And I went back to his hometown. I
Mm,
interviewed his high school coach. Like, what, tell me about this kid. What do you? And everybody said, "What a good kid he was. What a good kid he was." He just got mixed up in the wrong thing, and
mm,
and all these things like that. So there's countless numbers of bad choices and bad moments. Goes back to us saying what that post was that invoked all those negative comments. Right. So those bad choices in the moment. These are damn good people all the way up until they were backed into a corner or provoked into
mm.
something or they had to do whatever. That's the majority of what you're going to see kind of going in and out of your jail and prison system, right?
Interesting. Interesting.
These are folks that selling drugs, right? Some of your best business people I know are drug dealers.
Mm,
Absolutely. But when you get into the crimes against humanity thing, sometimes that's it. Like it's husband walking in and finding wife messing around, or wife walking in and finding husband
mm,
messing around, and it's a heat of the moment. Somebody gets shot, somebody dies, somebody gets stabbed. Um, those are a lot of times are your crimes that you see there. You throw in your child abuse, all this negative stuff that comes with that. But then you got over here, those are people that you probably would work with in a whatever setting,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Those are people that come and go. They get it's emotionally. I'm out of money. I got to go rob this bank,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
But then you have this small percentage that's over here, that is
They're
they're your
like,
serial killers.
they're probably just evil.
They're just probably evil,
See,
right?
okay, so
When you look
that's
at prison
interesting.
system, I wanted to qualify that because I didn't want you to be like, oh, yeah. So here's why I would say that. Like most of your people that's going out of prison, um, it's that they had one negative moment that put
I
them there.
see.
Got drinking and
Yeah,
driving. He's driving home, wrecks, hit somebody,
interesting.
manslaughter. He does 20 years. A lot of guys back in my day, statutory rape, underage, like
Mm,
hey Jeff, she was at a bar. I picked her up at a bar. She's supposed to be 21 to be in there. There's also guys that do rape, right? And
yeah,
they need to be in jail. But
yeah,
there's also these moments of bad decisions that generally put what we could say, just because you're in jail or prison, you're not a bad person,
yeah,
right? It's just
interesting.
that moment, whatever that moment is that got you there. Now, just because you're in jail for a plethora of other things that are really nefarious when it comes to crimes against people or kids and stuff like that, different story.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but when you look at, if you ride by your county facility, most of those folks in there you'd have on your freaking adult league softball team, right? You would
Interesting.
it
Like,
would
just
be
they're
just
not
one of,
bad people. They just
yeah, not
made
bad
a
people.
bad choice either in
Yeah,
a moment or maybe
yeah.
a series of bad
Reacted,
decisions or
yeah, reacted,
interesting.
drinking, negative, right? And so
Yeah.
it's not uncommon. Um, for people to go through that, pay their debt to society, they're out. We see that happen all the time with stars or athletes, and they're
Mm,
forgiven, move on, and it happens in every community. Daddy gets out of jail, whatever, but he's we got to get him back to work. We got to do
mm,
all the things, and got to surround mom or dad or whoever these people are with just a positivity, and generally they'll go. The problem is if they can't find what they're looking for, they're going to revert back to crime because then they can go
mm,
back and hang out where they were comfortable
sure,
at, right?
sure,
Where they
sure.
found structure, where they found all the things. But I'll still say when you go over here to this one side, just a little bit, you're going to find those.
Yeah.
You're going to find the evil people of the world.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so there was this book that I read. Well, I didn't finish it, admittedly. It was called No Bad Parts, and I think it's interesting because it's so I think the actual concept is called internal family systems, something like that. But essentially
Mm-hmm.
what the book talks about, as far as I understand it, is that like we have these like different versions of ourselves like within us, and like all at different ages, and essentially that like if we can heal these parts of us, then we can heal ourselves. Now I don't know, right? I didn't finish the
Yeah,
book, but it was
I'm reading. Yeah,
interesting.
you're right. You're spot on. I'm looking at the highlights. But
There you
yeah,
go.
you're right.
Okay,
Yeah,
so what was
you
really
just summarized it.
interesting, yeah, what was really interesting to me when I read it was they were talking about, they said even the worst offenders, like pedophiles and things like that, they said even with those people that this worked. And I was like, that's kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah,
So I think it's, how like you have confirmation bias. That this is a scenario where it felt like confirmation bias for me, but or it felt like validation, right? When I read that, I was like, okay, that's interesting, because I would agree with you. I think if you look at it logically, right, you've got, let's say, for lack of a better way to say it, good people don't go to jail, live normal lives, don't commit any crimes, okay? Then you have this chunk of people who like, oh, okay, I made a bad decision or a series of bad decisions, I ended up in trouble, I'm in jail or whatever, committed a crime, did something, right? And then like you mentioned, there's a tiny little sliver where you're like, that person's just evil, right? Because of the type of crimes that they committed, serial killers, pedophiles,
yeah,
whatever. But when I read that in that book, that like they said that they've had like they've never not been able to I don't know what the word you want to use is, cure someone or whatever, or like help them recover. Like even if they, you know, had committed heinous crimes and stuff, I was like, well, that's pretty interesting. And again, for me, it made me feel like, okay, maybe that is true, that people's default, like the default is good. And that ultimately, like even the people who end up in like that little sliver, it's like maybe it was a series of either bad decisions or experiences or traumas or something like that that led them to that point. I don't know, right? I'm not a doctor and I don't know
Yeah,
if I'm ever going to know,
I'm gonna
but
check.
I
I'll
think it's
check that
interesting to
out. It's
talk about.
no, I'm with you. I'll check that out. I don't, I don't think anything's foolproof, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I also would like for the guy that I was talking about to have read this and be so he could be like, oh, you know
Sure.
what, man, this is a life changing book right here.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, so
See, this is the thing, is that I think as human beings, and this is totally understandable, we want justice, right? Like, let's say there's
yeah,
somebody who is a pedophile, and there's no person who would be like, you know, we should let him go, right? Everyone would be like, you know, put him in jail, put him to death, whatever, right? Because like we feel like justice is needed. But what if the default of human beings is good? And what if there was something that would like fix that person?
yeah,
Like
read this book, right? Yeah.
ultimately it's kind of like, yeah, I get it, we want justice, but also like if he could be fixed, then like we should just fix the person, right? Like that's what you, that's ultimately like would be the
You
goal.
see those guys reoffend though, right? You see so many people go in and out. That's the thing. Like, let me tell you something. I did a weekend. Man, you want to talk about appreciating freedom? Go do a weekend in county. Um, it just it was like it was one of those things. Like I really all the things I took for granted, and one of them was freedom. And
Mm,
when that was taken, I was like, I am never going. I will not. Oh, I don't do anything that's going to put me anywhere remotely having to lose my freedom again.
hmm.
So point being is like there should be some consequence. Like there should be just a click to be like, I don't want to go back to that.
Yeah.
But so many, I think like as much effort as we put on that, it's we see a lot of folks reoffend and they go
Yeah.
back in. Sometimes it's support, right? We know that. Sometimes it's
Sure.
just no. There's no family. There's no network. They're socially hard to get along with, so they're hard. They're struggling
Mm,
to fit in. Um, so you see that side of reoffending, but then you see the folks that have network or they have money or they're in a good spot, but yet they abuse kids again or they do something that's because that's just what they do, right?
yeah.
You would think throughout all the prison stuff, all the stuff, the jail and setting that goes on, all the education they get, that would change too, and it doesn't. So
Yeah.
I don't, I would probably, there's probably a deeper, um, it's probably a deeper layer in there. Somebody's way smarter than old Jeff's gonna come along and be like, "Oh yeah, this is what it is." But
No,
there's
but I
probably
get it.
something in there that's it's maybe a little more mental health. We put a lot of
Yeah.
emphasis on mental health now.
Yeah.
I think when you get into some of that stuff, dude, is it's negative childhood.
Yeah.
I
Sure.
think we can anchor a lot of it at negative childhood.
Yeah.
Um,
It's really interesting that so what you just said, because like about mental health, because I think it's really easy for us to be like, well, that person's bad and that's why they should be punished. But like
yeah,
ultimately, it's like you said, some people, it like it's enough that like if you lose your freedom a little bit, you're like, I'm never going to do anything, like, no, absolutely not. Like I actually so it's interesting, in I live in Arizona, and apparently in Arizona if you get a DUI, there it's mandatory jail time. Like there's no,
yeah. A
like
lot
you
of states are
cannot
like that
not
now.
go. You have to go to
Yeah,
jail at least one night, right? Doesn't matter how good your lawyer is, you're going to jail. And I had a passenger who she told me that she was like, tomorrow I have to go turn myself in to jail because I have to go for like 24 hours because, you know, I had a DUI. She had a really interesting story. Like she was like, I don't even drink. I literally was just at my company party and I had a little bit too much. I was driving home and my tail light was out. That
yeah.
was why I got pulled over, not because I was drinking, like because I was swerving like crazy. The cop asked me like, have you been drinking? And I said yes, because I didn't know.
I've
Like,
been drinking.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes, I had a couple drinks. She took the breathalyzer, got a DUI. She had to go to jail. Anyway, I'm saying all this to say that was enough for me to never drink when I go out. I go out now and I literally just don't drink. Like just being able to like know that like, oh man, I could go to jail. Just thinking about going to jail is enough for me, not just to limit the amount I drink, but just literally to not do it at all. I just made a decision. I'm not going to drink and like even one beer and drive home, because if there's any chance that I'm over the limit, I do not, that's just not me. I don't want to go to jail. Right. So what I'm saying all this to say, like one, like for a lot of people, the idea of losing their freedom, or like you said, spending a weekend without that freedom is enough for them to be like, I'm never going to
Yeah.
do this ever again. But for other people, is it possible that there is something that just simply needs to be fixed? And I think that's why I feel like it's important to me to like to know this. Like, what is the nature? Because if the nature is good, and people are doing bad things, then what is it that's causing them to do those bad things if their inherent nature is good? And if there is something that can fix that, right? Like it's funny, I didn't even finish reading this book, but I was really inspired by that, by hearing that like they even with, the most nefarious offenders, that they were able to recover. It's kind of like, well, that's really interesting then, because ultimately I feel like that's the goal, right? Like, don't you just want people to not do bad things? Like, yes, of course we want justice, but ultimately we just want people to not do bad stuff. And if we could get that to enough people, right, that they're able to overcome whatever it is that's causing this in themselves, it's like, why would we not want that,
Mine was probably more of just one of my friends told me, he's like, you're not a bad guy. It just took you longer to grow up than the rest of us. Um, just like reckless behaviors. My wife coined it destructive behaviors, destructive habits.
Mm,
But that was the environment I was raised around,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I'm just taking it over to those folks, and why is I think that sometimes people know what they know, um, and timing plays a huge role. I had people, my good friends would be like, "Dude, we tried to tell you for 2 years." And I go, "I heard you, but I didn't want to listen."
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so sometimes I think it's timing of the situation. It's where we're supposed to be, when that moment. Like you said about that book, you brought it up tonight. I've started reading the book and it not registered, only to go back years later and be
Yeah.
like, man, why did this is the best book ever, because it's relevant at the moment,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It makes sense.
sure.
I don't I would It's a really interesting conversation. I'm glad it took us down this path of, but I think when you go back, um, a lot of our stuff starts off of that emotional whatever. And in Facebook, we talked about the
Hmm.
message or the text, read the comments, the text message, all the things that we do that's just boom.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's like that in a lot of ways. And then I think you have this buildup of just hell
Mm,
of someone who's experienced a lot of negativity in their
yeah,
life. So you have that angle.
yeah.
And then you have people that are born bad, and
Yeah,
they were, and that's a small percentage, but it happens.
sure.
But I think when we try to qualify it as a person, I think when you look at the ultimate majority of everyone has their faults, and we all do, right? But I think the person who's in your county jail that just did a weekend for whatever they did, if you were flat tired tomorrow on the interstate, they would probably, or hey man, it's freaking, let me change that for you real quick.
Yeah,
You're,
yeah.
especially if they saw you struggling. I think some of the folks that if they were in an orange jumpsuit, you'd be like, oh my God, he's a prisoner, run. But take that off and put them. They would change your tire. They'd go get you a gallon of gas if you need it, right? So I
Yeah,
think you would find the majority of our folks are going to be some of the absolute best, and I've met them, and you
yeah,
have to, and you'll continue to meet just some of the best people on your podcast and different walks of life, and um, but I will say that there's that small percentage that you got to be ready for, and you gotta hope you never cross paths with them.
sure.
And if you do, you hope it's on one of their good days when they're not in the mindset to do something bad, right? Um,
Yeah, that's
My
true.
buddy had this happen. I got to wrap up, but my
Yeah, no
buddy had
worries.
this happen one night. He was my mentor. I was telling him about it. Taught me in police work. My investigator guy.
Mhm.
He had there was a house that was burnt down. He responded to the fire, but on the way he passed a car that was traveling really fast. He was like, "Man, that's suspicious." So he turns on and goes and pulls the guy over. Goes up and just, oh, hey, I didn't know it was you, and gets back in his car. It was the guy that set the house on fire to burn the family out. And
What?
my buddy would tell you, he was like, he used to tell me the story. He'd be like, I knew that if I had pushed the envelope or asked him to step out of the car, he would have killed me that night. He said, I just
Whoa.
knew it in my gut, right? So, um, this guy here's a bad guy. He just set a house on fire to burn to burn this family out, and ended up catching him. Now listen, he was a bad dude. He was
Wow.
one of the. I just remember that story. I can't remember any of the names, which is probably a good thing. But um, he was like, there's bad dudes out there. Bad women too. We say bad dudes a lot, but there's some bad ladies out there too.
Yeah. Well, hey Jeff, I
Yeah,
know you said you got to wrap up, but I
we'll do it
appreciate
again.
having you on. It's like I said, because in my very very first episode, like where I kind of explained why I was doing this, it is really important for me. Like I like hearing other people's perspective, even if only just so I know that there's other perspectives out there, and at best to help me like refine my own perspective. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience. Is there anything you want listeners to know before we wrap up?
Oh man, just get we left you some nuggets. Make sure you go back if there's some things, and always you get the opportunity to share this because there's if you might get a lot of enjoyment out of it, but there's someone who needs to hear it. So
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
we left we left a couple nuggets for you out there. If anything I can do to connect with you, my name's Jeff Robertson. If you Google jeffreyrobertson.com, you're gonna find me because that's my URL. So.
Perfect.
Um, but make sure you share this and let's grow Giuliano's reach and his impact, and so we can continue to have these conversations.
Jeff, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate you, man.
Yeah, brother.
Thanks for being here. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who'd appreciate it. For everything I have to offer, visit howtobeaperson.co.